I would be remiss if I didn't thank my mother, Jacqueline Elaine Fortson, for educating me to the importance and the value of what this generation did for our generation. Thank you. You can clap to that. I don't come to you today as a pundit or an intellectual. I don't even come as an educator, although I do believe in education. I come as an organizer. So I'm not looking at a room of people that need to know the stats and the figures and what's actually taking place. If you're in this room today, there's something inside of you that told you, either from experience, either it's a calling that you have a moral responsibility. All right, so this is not an education I'm gonna give you, it's more of some tools and some aspects that we can use in order to become better, more effective organizers on the ground. So on February 17th, 1998, I was a junior political science major at Howard University. And that year I was humbled and honored to serve as the student body president at Howard University, Houston president. And we were the last student government to bring on that campus 9 months before he passed, the late Kwame Ture, known to my mother's generation as Stokely Carmichael.
We, the leadership of the Howard student body, are honored to take our place among a host of student leadership and administrations over the past 30 years to welcome Kwame home. We know that to some people home is heaven, and that to others Africa, Guinea is his home. But Howard University is, and will always be Kwame's home, away from home.
He left us with some dictums that day that burned my brain and bathed my veins. Haven't been the same since.
Sometimes some people do not understand the real essence of our struggle.
He said that the struggle is eternal. He said that is, there's no time for us to just go relax and enjoy life. He even told us if we thought that way, that was reactionary thinking of the worst order.
Reactionary thinking of the worst order. Simply because the more you struggle, the more you know. And the more you know, the more you're able to do. And your people are going to need you to do until you die. Therefore, if you understand this, you prepare yourself for eternal struggle. We want to have a fireside chat, just open up some assumptions so we all understand what we're talking about. Some people may think that we're talking about you be a SNCC member, you wage a struggle in SNCC for a couple of years, and then after that you become a congressman and do nothing for the people.
Only God knows the great pain and the indescribable loss that my family and I have endured since our son was so violently snatched from us.
Gary was not just any young black man. Gary was a second-year full-time college student.
Was my son the victim of racial profiling? Would he have been allowed to proceed to his home, which was only 3 minutes away, if he had not been a young black male?
He proceeds to the car. He pulls Gary by his collar, gun to his temple, pulls him off the car. Gary tumbles forward. He falls back to get his balance. Officer Brian Catlett takes one shot. Doesn't take 14 or 24, one shot to his chest. After that occurred, they pulled Gary to the corner, would not allow anyone to give him any type of medical care. I'm sorry.
I still ask myself, when will it end? I don't know the answer, but I do know this. As long as freedom-loving people sit passively and do nothing, injustice, racial profiling, misuse of police powers, and racial discrimination will continue at an even greater pace than exists today. How does one change the systems that are so ingrained with biased statutes and inherent prejudices that make it almost impossible to get fair and equal justice for people of color in all areas of society?
in his final paper, he wrote, "It takes a village to bring about change." I look out here today and I look across this country and the rallies and the marches that we have, and I see the village. It's here.
I met Johnathan Hutto in 1999 when a group of us were going to Annapolis to get the governor to reopen the case or appoint a special prosecutor. And Johnathan just came on and, you know, he formed a great alliance with us. He's a great organizer, and he has been very instrumental in helping me out, because a lot of times, especially in the beginning, I was the main person who was doing everything, like sending out invitations, telling people where to come and when our meetings were going to be held, just to keep my son's name alive. And we started the People's Coalition for Police Accountability in 1999, or the latter part of 1999.
I met Johnathan about 20 years ago, and it was through Dr. Alvin Thornton. Doc called me and said, "I have these people who want a place to meet. Can you get us a place to meet?" And I told him, yeah, I thought I could. So I went ahead and volunteered at our church. And there were about, I guess, 10, 15 people who met. And this was the beginning of the coalition. That's the People's Coalition for Police Accountability. And so I met Johnathan at this time. And what I discovered immediately was that he was an activist. I mean, it was sort of obvious, and that he was passionate about what he was doing. It was another young man who worked with Johnathan. His name was Opio, and they actually, I always have said, were the nucleus of the coalition. They were the youngest. They had ideas that we didn't have at that point, and they were willing to work. But we hit the issue of police brutality head on, and we became, I don't want to say notorious, but we weren't welcomed in the county. There were boards that the county was forming at that time, or panels to look into police brutality. And we weren't welcomed on those panels. This was the first time, I think for me, that had been the case. So I felt that certainly we are being effective when those people who have been making the decisions don't want us as part of the decision makers, and we are trying to achieve the same goal they are. We're doing something right.
When I was 17 years old, I came from a home where my mother opposed militarism. We weren't a rich family. We didn't have a lot of money. I was one of those families, we didn't grow up necessarily poor. We had the necessities of life, but we didn't have everything. But we were rich in values, right? So my mother definitely kept military recruiters away from me at age 17, 18. But at age 26, with an undergraduate degree, with a small son and needing to pay off student loans and wanting to start a graduate education, I thought the Navy could be an actual outlet for me. So I joined the United States Navy in January 2004, and 2 years later was off the coast of Iraq and had a hangman's noose dangling in front of my face, all right? I bumped into a number of Nazis when I was in the military. So I took my chain of command to task, but then I got this book in the mail, Soldiers in Revolt, all right, which chronicles GI resistance during the Vietnam War. It was a book that I had never read, and it's a history that was unknown to me, and I thought that I knew just about all there was about at least Vietnam, but I did not know that there was a movement of active duty military within the ranks itself during Vietnam. And one of the things that inspired me and inspired all of us was an open petition that they took out. An open appeal they took out in New York Times, 1,365 of those active duty GIs during Vietnam. And so what I said to myself, and as I contacted my friend Lindsay, who I knew was in active duty ranks, and as I met Lim in Norfolk in June of that year when we brought Dr. Courtwright down, is that if they could do that, during that time, then what prevents us from trying to do something to give voice and to give purpose and to give meaning to our service? It was clear during that generation that there was a small contingent of folks that understood you had to organize within the military. We can organize our people within the military. Yes, we can. The Military Whistleblower Protection Act gives military members the right to send a protected communication to a member of Congress on any issue. And it was the basis of that which led to the Appeal for Redress, which we launched when I was active duty Navy. The Appeal for Redress, and it's chronicled in this book that we put out called Anti-War Soldier, How to Dissent Within the Ranks of the Military. We come here today on behalf of 1,223 active duty members of the United States military, reserve members, National Guard members, who are using their constitutional rights to speak out against this war, an imperialist war, a war for profit, not for people, a war for death, not for people, a war against the working class, not for justice. I'm not anti-war. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not opposed to protecting our country and defending our principles. But at the same time, as citizens, it's our obligation to have a questioning attitude, about policy.
Just because we volunteered for the military doesn't mean we volunteered to put our lives in unnecessary harm and to carry out missions that are illogical and immoral. We're not telling young men and women that it's not worth it to serve their country. We've served our country. The men and women who have signed the appeal have served their country. So no, we're not saying it's not worth it. We're saying that if you have reservations about it, to communicate it.
Tell your congressperson to get a backbone, to get a spine, and to stand up on the mandate that the American people gave them last November. Tell them to stand up.
We talk about the service members in Iraq constantly, and we should. Those are our brothers and sisters. But also our brothers and sisters, not just within the ranks of the military, but throughout the entire world. And so we not only speak about those 3,000+ who have sacrificed their lives and did so honorably because the government asked them to do so. But we also speak for the hundreds and thousands of Iraqi civilians whose communities have been decimated, whose hospitals have been destroyed, whose schools have been destroyed, whose lives have been turned upside down by illegal, unjust, and immoral war. People, are going to struggle for that which they have to have for their rights and for their freedom. And if they can't get it through the sweets, this is where we are, then they'll get in the streets.
This is a very great turnout that we have, and we have to continue to build this mass movement. We have to understand that this current war is going to continue. Many people who are here are veterans of the GI movement from the Vietnam War. And the reason why they're here back again 35, 40 years later is because we got to keep the mass movement going no matter who's in office, a Democrat, a Republican. We got to keep the mass movement going against the system. It's a systematic war. Lastly, we know that when a movement gets going, it takes on every sector of society. The soldiers, the sailors, the Marines, the veterans, the families, the workers, the students. This is what democracy looks like. This is what power to the people looks like. And it's going to take this kind of mass movement that engulfs the entire country as a whole to bring justice to America, bring justice to the working class, bring health care to our people, bring the focus back on Katrina, back on the government abandonment of people. That is exactly what it's going to take. And finally, join an organization. If you're out here today and you're not a part of an organization, join one. Join ANSWER. Join Veterans for Peace. Join Iraq Veterans Against the War. Join all these civil liberties, civil rights, human rights organizations, because it's going to take an organized effort of the grassroots to end this war. Imperialism means
we got to fight back.
Imperialism means
we got to fight back.
Iraq war means
we got to fight back.
Occupation means
we got to fight back.
No justice, no peace.
So what's the theme here? The theme here is that what I want to say to any activist, any organizer, anyone that desires to labor for peace, and that should be all of us, is that what the joke that went through my spine yesterday is that if we left the streets, we got to get back in the streets and organize for our survival. That's number one. Number two is that we have to have a deeper analysis of how to use the vote, which I firmly believe in. But I believe that post-1965 coming onward, too many of us started taking a nap, and then with the election of Barack Obama, sadly to say, some of us went straight to sleep. And we thought that the White House was going to do the work for us. But the reality is that we are now in a worse situation today in the United States of America racially and in terms of class and in terms of poverty than we ever been, at least in my lifetime. And I'll be 40 years old in the spring. So we got to get back in the streets. The vote can be a tool and a weapon for our survival and progress. What do I mean by that? How can the vote be a tool for our survival and progress? Number one, we have to reanalyze, what does it mean to win? What does winning mean? I live in a county, majority Democratic Party county, where right now they closing schools, closing school right in my neighborhood. Got 29 schools on the list they're gonna close to supposedly save $600+ million. That's Prince George's County. Prince George's County, half of the school board appointed, chairperson appointed, superintendent appointed. Prince George's County, where in the election cycle in 2010, 80+ thousand black voters stayed home, Governor Hogan gets elected. Governor Hogan announces no Syrian refugees welcome to the state of Maryland. We're struggling for democracy in Prince George's County. I'm a child of the American South. We were taught in Atlanta, Georgia, in my childhood, I'm an 80s kid, born 1977, that we had overcome. In fact, we were taught that we were being raised and reared in the New South. But what I recall from my lessons, both oral and written, is that when the modern day civil rights movement began, 1955, in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, when a trained human rights activist by the name of Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat that day, we did not have the most votes that day. In fact, we couldn't vote. So how were we able to bring a bus system to its knees after 386 days? In 1957, in Little Rock, Arkansas, we did not have the most votes. Daisy Bates and Little Rock 9 didn't have the most votes. They couldn't vote. In 1961, when a freedom ride took off from Washington, D.C. with 13 freedom riders, the architect of that freedom ride, James Farmer, the late James Farmer, the Congress of Racial Equality, we did not have the most votes. We could not even vote. In 1963, in Birmingham, Alabama, Eugene Bull Connor represented state power. We were being crushed in Birmingham. We didn't have the most votes. We didn't even have the right to vote. But these cities, I'm saying to you, in Selma, if that was the crescendo, if that was where everything came to a climax, here we had a climax of Alabama state power smashing down on these nonviolent direct action protesters. We did not have the right to vote. We still made it to the state capitol. I'm reminded in San Francisco, I'm coming back to this theme of not having the most votes, Jesse Louis Jackson Sr. didn't have the most votes in San Francisco. Some of you might have been there, I'm sure you were. He ran third out of 8 candidates, but with 3.5 million votes and massive black voter registration in the South, we took the Senate in 1986. What did that mean? That meant when the veto came from Ronald Reagan against sanctions against the apartheid regime in South Africa, there was a majority in the Senate to smash that veto of Ronald Reagan, and the instrument and the tool behind that was Ron Dellums and his advocacy out of California. We can do that. That's how we use the vote, as a tool, as a weapon for our survival and for our progress. And lastly, I would say that we have to struggle to create some alternative power in these cities and these municipalities, what my colleague said here, for us to get the progressive reforms that we need. I'm reminded that right here in this city, one of the lasting reforms of the late Marion Barry, the first chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was to make it a law for young people to be hired to work by the city government, and that legacy still stands to this day, the Mayor's Youth Leadership Institute. So we can do it, but we got to organize, as Kwame Ture left us with, organize, organize, organize. Thank you so much. And in 2012, that was around the time of the travesty down in Sanford, Florida, of Trayvon Martin. And so with myself and a number of organizing activists on the ground in Prince George's County did, that was a year after I was honorably discharged, was we reformulated the Prince George's County People's Coalition, which was a coalition I was engaged with years before. This was during the time of the killing of Prince Jones, the campaigns around Archie Elliott, Gary Hopkins, Desmond Ray, a number of mostly African-American males that were killed with impunity by Prince George's County's police. So we reconstituted.
And initially it was the People's Coalition for Police Accountability, but over the last 5 or 7 years, we just say Prince George's People's Coalition.
That coalition began to organize and to campaign once again, and then a year later, when the verdict in Sanford, Florida came out, we were a part of a number of organizations that pressed on the Justice Department to do the right thing and to investigate that department and to do what they could through their Civil Rights Division to get some justice in that case.
But Johnathan is always in the forefront of organizing and getting us together for the walk to D.C. for the Trayvon Martin case and for a lot of other local cases that I can't even think of, but especially cases dealing with police brutality.
We've continued to press both in the state of Maryland and in Prince George's County for reforms, to get citizens on internal trial boards, to bring some strong investigatory power to civilian complaints, and to be engaged in that legislative process, not just legislatively, but also empowering citizens to take direct action. The ACLU is one of our partners in our coalition, using the app, teaching people to know your rights and how to videotape and to witness when you see police officers interacting with citizens on the street.
And I think he would be a great person to run for an elected office, and I told him that he would probably become the second Black president of the United States. He's excellent about staying in contact with people, getting notices out, and sending us copies of meetings and all. And he has a very wonderful partner, Yolanda, whom he married about 4 or 5 years ago. And I think they are a good match for each other, and she's very, very supportive.
What I want to put forth is that there needs to be a committee within this group that will be charged with coming up with the effective strategy going forward in terms of how do we take everything that was expressed in this room and push it forward in such a way where the system understands.
We're going to have groups coming from all over the state lobbying on a variety of bills, and we call it United for Justice Lobby Day. And I think that that's going to be a really strong opportunity for us to show a united front on a lot of different issues that folks are talking about tonight.
It's a town hall. We've organized it around the immigration ban and the executive orders, but if you all have issues that you'd like to bring up to them, this is some place that you're most welcome to come.
I read these words as a young freshman at Howard, and it was implanted in my head as soon as I read them. A gentleman by the name of George Jackson. I had never heard of George Jackson, but when I read those words, anytime I speak, anytime I have anything to say, I end by saying, settle your quarrels, come together, understand the true reality of our situation, understand that fascism is here, that millions have died that could have been saved, and that millions more would die or live half-butchered, poor lives if we fail to act. Do what must be done. Embrace your love and humanity in a worldwide revolution. Join us. Join us and give up your life for the people. Thank you.